Perfect. Thank you so much. I feel kind of lucky to have come in at this point in the presentation panel because we're starting to see sort of this interdisciplinary approach come into play as we're thinking about how do we conceptualize and measure social norms. We were focusing on issues of women's economic empowerment broadly in our Emerge project, which is a very measurement-focused project, particularly in the area of quantitative research measures. And I'm going to share some findings with you on how, first sharing the conceptualization and then some findings on what we're applying some social norms measures on paid work at scale that were done for the World Values Survey. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go through the conceptual framework quickly because we could spend days just discussing concept. But I wanted to sort of highlight that we come from a place of looking at these issues at the individual or group level, that empowerment itself is a process or an outcome, moving people from critical consciousness to agency to self-determined goals achieved, but at any point in this trajectory, that is an indication of empowerment, and we need to be measuring all the way across the trajectory. With that in mind, we recognize that this is pretty complex, and we have to kind of do a deep dive within each of these elements to pull out the concepts that we would want to measure. And we've done that in the area of agency, for example, where we speak of the combination of do you think you can do it, and do you do it, and do you continue to do it in the face of resistance or backlash. So what you can see from this framework is it's very much a perspective based on having to go against what is expected of you. And that's really where the social norms come into play. But we also recognize that there are a lot of inputs into that process, inputs that are community and household factors, social structures and institutions, and intergroup dynamics in the case of group level empowerment. So that's sort of external to the individual or group undergoing the empowerment process, but internal to the group or the individual is their psychology, and within the group, the intergroup dynamics. So I'm only bringing this up to say that the concepts that we want to be able to identify for measurement are vast, and I think, you know, at every layer that we're looking at, we can go into deeper and deeper levels. So with regard to social norms, I want to acknowledge that this is representation of work from the full Emerge team, and in particular guidance from Rebecca Lundgren and the Social Norms Learning Collaborative that she leads. And I want to highlight that this really borrows from interdisciplinary fields, but a lot of the work that the social norms movement in the past few years has done, starting with some of the work in psychology. So this is the notion that the way norms operate is you first learn your norms, you adhere to them, and then you move into a position of actually reinforcing them as well, or enforcing them in the social environment. These are probably not surprising, you know, these are things that are familiar to you likely, which are, we think about injunctive norms, what you're expected to do, and descriptive norms, what you believe or observe others doing. And that, you know, the enforcement aspect of these norms is whether you're going to feel rewarded or punished, or whether you feel like an alignment with the group. And what is that group? Who are these reference groups? You know, it matters that who you're looking to identify what adherence to norms are, but it also matters who the power holders in your structure are. And I recognize I'm going through this rather quickly. So the last point I'll make is the sensitivity. I care. So if there are sanctions, do you actually care about the rewards or the punishments of these sanctions? If I don't wear a certain, I'm from Mississippi, and if I didn't dress a certain way, maybe I wouldn't be invited into the debutante society within that context. That if that doesn't matter to you, then it doesn't really matter to you. Then you're not going to adhere to the social norm in that regard. So I recognize I'm going through this rather quickly, but it's to sort of give you an understanding of the foundations through which we were looking at social norms measures. We at Emerge compile the measures that have been tested in the field or show promise based on early stage testing to ensure that you know, it's a global public good, that you can get free access to being able to get these measures, and they've been sort of there's a menu-driven approach to being able to find measures in your area of interest. So we wanted to understand this, now I'll slow down, for injunctive norms, what you think others think you should do. Descriptive norms, what you see others doing or what you believe others are doing. And then these sanctions, which include the positive and negative sanctions, strength and sensitivity of the norm, and then who the reference group is, how many people were really actually capturing this. So what you can see is across these different areas of women's economic empowerment that were identified through expert input in a longer process I won't go into right now, but we have a roadmap report available and I can share it on the text. That across these different areas, unpaid care, domestic labor within households, financial inclusion, business, enterprise, education, so on and so on, we find very few measures of norms. And that the general norms that you see here, where you see a bit more about the descriptive norms, they tend to be in the area of gender roles. So some of the things that were discussed first, masculinity, dominance norms, hypersexuality. Let me go to the next slide. So what we found in that first segment of work is that the emerge measures we were finding on our website really didn't offer a whole lot in norms, and a lot of what it did offer in norms was in the form of attitudes. So we also recognized that there's an emerging literature, because that was done about a year ago, and there's emerging literature in this area. And I know that GROW is on the line, and they've also done work around literature reviews. Certainly Mara and her team has done it. So this is just a newer review that focuses specifically on social norms measures that we are currently in the process of doing. We reviewed 7 electronic databases, and we will update the time period to beyond July 2020, but just from 2010 Jan to July 2020, looking at papers that had a quantitative analysis with a survey measure, but and had some indications of the scientific underpinnings of the measurement, although we were very broad in the way we define scientific underpinnings, the Cronbach alpha descriptive data. We were pretty broad. We identified 369 records, non-duplicative records that met our criteria. Only 9 had any kind of statistical basis with psychometric testing to assess reliability and validity. The norms that we were able to identify in this area were related to wages, and that was specific to agricultural workers, credit card debt, intention to purchase longevity annuities. I don't know how you can get more specific than that, but improved grassland, entrepreneurship among older adults, and hiring and retraining people and cancer survivors. And you can see from these norms that they're not just related to the WE, but they're related to the topic area. To the population. And we thought that that was a really important finding, that norms around WEE are not just specific to the nature of WEE assessed, but these measures are tending to reflect what they are specific to a population area and a subpopulation area. So gender and older adults, or gender among small dairy farmers. What we also found was there's a lot of missing data which relate to unpaid care and domestic work as norms. We got a lot of attitudes, but not a lot of norms. Education, attainment and training, and digital technologies, freedom of movement. And some of this is coming out, but they're not providing the psychometrics to, it's usually internal reliability. And then you could view this as validity in terms of assessing it with an expected outcome, but it's not generally what we would view as least associated with some sort of criterion or construct validity, where it's more, the associations are not just specific to an outcome, but are more reflective of things you would, that are closely related constructs, similar types of constructs. Okay, So with that in mind, we've been working with survey groups, some of whom are here. Survey groups are groups that are actively testing cross-national surveys at scale. So we try to see things that are being done to give an assessment that can be offering global indicators. We're trying to be working with survey groups now to build their social norms measures. And the first one we had the opportunity to work with was World Values Survey. And so this work was really led by the Karolinska Institute and WVS, World Values Survey, with support from us and funding from the Gates Foundation. We developed measures that were built on formative research, expert input, and theory. And the two that I would like to focus on today are sanctions of women working outside the household, and risk for sexual violence harassment at the workplace. This original testing was done with, psychometric testing was done in Ethiopia, but there are multiple countries in which this work is happening or being instituted. So I'm going to be presenting about the psychometric testing that was done in Ethiopia, and it includes exploratory confirmatory factor analysis for validity, and then Cronbach alpha to assess internal reliability. What I also want to show you just really quickly is I want to show you the difference between what we were saying on one item in our measures for Ethiopia and Zimbabwe. And these are the items in the context of fairly comparable levels of female employment in the countries, 48%, 43%, and this is defined as a woman working for pay. We wanted to understand some sanctions or backlash. I'm sorry, three items. Sanctions or backlash for women who are working outside the home. She will be criticized. She will be viewed as immoral. She will likely receive unwanted sexual attention at work. And I just want to highlight that she will be considered criticized or viewed as immoral, how dramatic the findings are in terms of distinction between Zimbabwe and Ethiopia, even in a context where you see somewhat comparable, although it's a bit higher in Ethiopia, levels of women's employment among our respondents. Okay, so these are the items that came out of these measures. The perceived women's economic sanctions related to working outside the home and consequences of this. She may be criticized, arguments with the husband, conflicts with the in-laws, considered immoral. You can see it's got a really good Cronbach alpha, 0.91, and it also demonstrated, so there were additional, I'm not going to go into details, but there was these items were the original items. They did exploratory factor analysis, and the items held together, under a single factor, and then they did a confirmatory factor analysis based on what we would assume they would be holding together. And in both cases, these worked. So both were originally 4 items, and they stayed 4 items. The second one is for a scale. We have the descriptive norms. I'm sorry, I had mentioned let me just go back for a second. We also had information on perceived risk for sexual harassment in the workplace and community. That was not instituted in Ethiopia, so we have not got that one yet. So I decided I would share with you the descriptive norms on neighborhood sexual violence or community sexual violence, like how often do these kinds of issues occur in the community in which you live or neighborhood in which you live. And this was really designed to tap into women's potential feeling of safety outside the home. And you can see these items are sexual assault, rape, trading sex, hurting men, embrace hurting women and girls, and then sexually harassing them. And we again see a very good Cronbach alpha, and again we found good. So the exploratory analysis brought this factor together, and our confirmatory analysis held these factors, these items that we would have thought would be together. So I just want to say that I'm not giving you a lot of detail about the measures and the findings, and I know that can be frustrating because you're like, well, what did they find? But I'm really trying to highlight that these measures are getting put in the field, they're working, and we need to have a cognizance that they're coming out so that we can start thinking about how we want to utilize them as markers for change over time. Nonetheless, there remains a need to develop new measures in this area, as we can see from the review of the literature. We also feel that there continues to be a lack of clarity on the conceptual and theoretical foundations of norms, with interchanging the notion of attitudes and social norms, sometimes only collecting the descriptive, what I expect, or what I see in my community, but not the injunctive, what I expect other people to do for me, not necessarily doing the sanctions. We have very few sanctions. We and almost never do we find detail about the referent group. And so we really need to have a consistency and clarity on some of these features of norms so that we're consistent in the way that we operate, that we develop the measures. And we are seeing from this and from some of the other new data that's coming out there that these pretty short measures are operating well at scale. And so the last thing I want to share is that we have some small funds, thank you to Catherine and the Gates Foundation for this, to help support researchers working in the field with existing projects to be able to develop and test WEE social norms measures so that the next time you see our heat map, we have a lot of those gaps filled in. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anita. And we're going to go now to Poonam Matreja,